we're going to take a break from our series on understanding Edom because we need to update the situation on the Kochav Yaakov, the Star of Jacob prophecy. And I've gotten in the last few days, I don't know how many 100 emails of people say, what happened? Did it happen? Did it didn't happen? Earthquake? What's going on? So, and I think it's pretty clear that we had a pretty serious seismic earthquake event in the Middle East. So we want to talk a little bit about that and the significance of the events of the last few days. So just a quick recap. The Star of Jacob prophecy, as we know, the Torah says, Bilam, the prophet, says, before Mashiach comes, a star will appear, Darach Kochav miYaakov, a star will appear in the night sky, and it's a moving star, a comet. Darach means that it's on a path. So a moving star, a comet, and then, as I talked about many times over the past year, astronomers discovered a comet that was supposed to come on September 27, which was the 25th of Elul on the Hebrew calendar on a Friday, and the Zohar has this famous prophecy. The Zohar explains what the Torah means. The Zohar says that star, the Star of Jacob, would appear on the 25th of Elul on a Friday, and lo and behold, that did indeed happen. The comet did come, although some people were doubting it, some people were saying the comet's going to burn up and it won't be visible, but it did appear on September 27th. It was the 25th of Elul, it was a Friday, and you could see the comet even with the naked eye. Maybe some of you saw it. I saw it once in my backyard. I caught a glimpse of it. So the star appeared, and the Zohar, of course, says that when that star would appear at the same time, that in a city of Rome, 3 buildings would fall, and a great headquarters, an edifice, a palace will be destroyed, and the leader of that place will be killed, this tormentor of Israel. And that also happened exactly on that day, on September 27th. As we know, the Israeli Air Force destroyed 3 buildings in Beirut. And under those 3 buildings they destroyed more than 3 buildings, but under 3 buildings in Beirut was the Hezbollah headquarters, and Nasrallah, this person who's been tormenting Israel and Lebanon for the past 30 some years, was killed. So the leader of Hezbollah was killed under these 3 buildings, the headquarters was destroyed, and that's precisely what the Zohar says. And the Zohar says a city of Rome. And we noted before, we did the class on Lebanon and Iran, that Beirut actually was the local, regional Roman capital 2,000 years ago. In the Roman Empire, Beirut served as the administrative center of the Middle East. So it really was, in the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when that prophecy was first composed, the Zohar is the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Beirut was a Roman city, the city of Rome in the area. So that the prophecy came about pretty much perfectly, I think better than we could have expected just recently. And then the next part of the prophecy, the Zohar says, and remember the Zohar was first published in the year 1290. It was first published 700 plus years ago, and it dates back to the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in the 2nd century, but these manuscripts were passed down in secret and were first put to the public in 1290. And then the final part of that prophecy is that the star will be in the sky, this comet will be in the sky for 70 days, and at the end of the 70 days, when this comet will disappear, there will be some great earthquake perhaps, but we have to re-examine the prophecy, an earthquake in and around Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And that'll bring us to the next stage of the prophecy as we approach the time of Mashiach in the end of days. And in between, as we explored in the Edom series, the Zohar says, during this time, while in this 70-day period, a leader will arise that will be of extremely haughty spirit, right? He will have a great haughty spirit, and he will stir up the world and shake up the world, and great wars will emerge right after he arises. And perhaps that was, we said last time, perhaps that was the election of, or re-election of Donald Trump, who is of extremely haughty spirit for sure. And right after he got elected, all these things are happening very quickly, right? The war in Lebanon ended. Now there's, again, talk of a hostage deal with Hamas, and now what's going on in Syria, and things are changing very, very rapidly. So again, just like the Zohar says, within this 70-day period, we've seen these incredible things. And 70 days from September 27th, from the 25th of Elul, was December 6th, and that was just on Friday. So did the seismic event happen? Well, actually, there was a literal earthquake in California last week. So a lot of people were emailing me saying, is this the earthquake that the Zohar is speaking about? The problem is that California is nowhere near Jerusalem or Israel. It has nothing to do with Israel. Unless it was some, secret government test underground. Who knows? Sometimes that's what these things are. We think it's an earthquake. The media tells us it's an earthquake, but it was actually maybe some secret new weapon being tested underground somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. So unless it was some secret weapons test that was being done by the U.S. and Israel somewhere there, I don't know. I don't think so. But otherwise, I don't think it had anything to do with it. But still interesting that a major magnitude 7 earthquake took place in America, at least, or off the coast of America at that exact time. But the bigger news was the geopolitical one. And if you go back and listen to every time that I've spoken about this prophecy in the past year, I said that it would be a political earthquake. Go back and listen, right? I've always said that. I've never believed that this would be a geological earthquake, and I'll explain why. So we did have a geopolitical earthquake last week. I actually first read on December 1st, I saw in the Kiev Post, it came up, for some reason Kiev Post appears on my newsfeed. So I saw in the Kiev Post that Russian soldiers were experiencing heavy casualties in Syria, and Russia sent a general, restationed a general from Ukraine to Syria, and things were heating up. That was on December 1st, and on the same day, the Times of Israel was saying that the rebels in Syria have relaunched suddenly an offensive. It seemed like the civil war in Syria was over, that Assad consolidated his rule, and everything seemed to be quiet. And suddenly on December 1st, the media was buzzing about a renewed surge in Syria. And the next day, December 2nd in the news, that Iraq was sending troops to Syria. So at that point, I was like, okay, I think this might be it. If this is like the fall of Assad and the fall of this regime that's been ruling Syria for the past 54 years, and that's a major opponent of Israel, always has been, in 67, 73, if that regime collapsed, that would be a huge political earthquake in the region, which would completely transform this region. So it was December 2nd. I'm like, you know what? I think this is going to be it. Let's wait for Shabbat. Let's see what happens Friday, Saturday. But this is probably going to be it, that Assad's going to be finished. And that's what happened. So Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, we heard the news, right? Assad was gone. He fled, and the rebels took Damascus. So this really is a huge earthquake for a few reasons. We've talked about this before on a number of occasions, that Syria is located strategically in a very important place. It's the corridor between Iran and Lebanon and the Mediterranean and Russia. It's like this whole axis, this connection, from Russia to the Mediterranean, through Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Turkey to the north. It's a very important strategic location. Geographically, Hezbollah gets most of its weapons through this corridor from Iran through Syria to Lebanon. So it's actually super important. Russia has a whole bunch of bases, Air Force and Navy, naval bases all over Syria. So that's one. And again, since Israel's founding, Syria was a major adversary of it. The two big adversaries for Israel historically have been Egypt and Syria. These were the two big, powerful Arab countries. If you remember, at one point, Egypt and Syria even tried to unite into the United Arab Republic. You've heard this before? At one point, they tried to become kind of like one confederation because they thought together they could destroy Israel. And once Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel in 78, 79, Syria remained the main opponent of Israel, very powerful, lots of chemical weapons of mass destruction. If you've heard the news in the last 24 hours, Israel's been taking out all these sites, all these chemical weapon sites, all those WMD sites. So this is like a really big deal. And Israel is significantly safer now, just from that perspective anyways, for the long term, that all those weapons have been destroyed. And not just Israel, but Syrians are a lot safer now because there were reports of Assad using these chemical weapons against his own people. So Syrians are also very happy in Syria and around the world. So it makes the region actually potentially a lot safer. We still don't know how stable this new regime will be, but it is a really big deal. And with the fall of Assad, these Syrian rebels, some of their leaders are saying that they might even make peace with Israel. They're open to a peace treaty with Israel. Yeah, seriously. You can look at the news.
They also said they want to liberate Saudi Arabia and Jerusalem.
Right. So I'm going to talk about those two possibilities. It's coming up. I want to talk about those two possibilities. None of this would have happened, of course, without the events of the past year and the events of the past few months. Israel completely obliterated Hezbollah, first with the pagers, which knocked out a few thousand of their operatives, and then the walkie-talkies, and then the bombardment, and then destroying all their leaders, Nasrallah, and then his replacement, and Israel completely destroyed this organization, and Hezbollah was important for supporting Assad. Hezbollah was fighting on the side of the Assad regime. So with Hezbollah wiped out, and Russia busy in Ukraine and suffering very heavy losses in Ukraine, the rebels saw an opportunity. And also Iran is much weaker. Israel's been taking out Iranian facilities. They knocked out Iranian missile capabilities. They say for at least a year, Iran can't produce any missiles. They knocked out their anti-air sites, S-300, all these things. So Israel's cleaned up the area, and that allowed for the rebels to defeat Assad very quickly. For all these reasons, the fall of Assad is a big deal. But the most important reason why the fall of Damascus is a big deal is because it plays right into these end of days prophecies, as we shall see. Because Damascus, Syria, it's extremely important in the Torah, and it's everywhere in Tanakh, and it's everywhere in prophecies about the end of days, and everywhere tied to the coming of Mashiach. That's what we want to explore tonight. And after tonight, you'll see how significant this was, how it really was this earthquake that the Zohar predicted, and why I felt like it would always be a political earthquake and not a geological one, for a few reasons. First of all, simply because we always want to try to interpret prophecies in a positive way. Remember, we have a rule in Judaism that every prophecy, there's positive prophecies and negative ones. And we have a rule, first of all, that positive prophecies will for sure be fulfilled. Negative ones don't have to be fulfilled. Negative ones, God gives us a warning, and we can avert them, and then those negative ones can be fulfilled in a positive way. It's like the parent-child relationship. If a parent promises something good to their child, they're going to give them that thing. They're not going to renege on that promise. But if a parent promises something bad to their child, a punishment, the parent is very happy to not do that punishment. Right? The punishment is the warning is given so that the child will behave. And if the child does behave, the parent has no interest in punishing the child. It's just a warning. So it's the same thing with this. If God promises us something good, for sure it'll happen. If God promises us something bad, it doesn't have to happen. Just like a father who says, if you don't behave, I'm going to do this and this and this. So it can be turned to the positive. So first of all, I always try to interpret things positively. So when you read about a catastrophic 45-mile earthquake, you want to say, well, let's hope it's not an actual earthquake, which would kill God knows how many people, God forbid. So in a positive way, that it would be a political earthquake, number one. Number two, from the first time I read this prophecy many, many years ago, a 45-mile earthquake never made sense to me, because that would basically destroy all of Israel's inhabited area. Israel's not so big, right? A 45-mile radius around Jerusalem would destroy practically Israel's whole population. Right, or most of Israel's inhabited area. It's just too big. It's unthinkable. It doesn't make sense. It would completely destroy the entire country. If you read the words, it never actually says earthquake. The original Aramaic, it just says, Izda'aza ara kadisha, that the land of Israel will be shaken up. It does not use the word for an earthquake. So that's also important to remember. It just says the land of Israel will be shaken up. And then that would reveal a cave and Mashiach. And I'm going to talk maybe a little bit about what that cave might be soon. So that's why I always felt like this would be a political earthquake, and we did see this huge political earthquake. Now, why is it so significant? Why is the fall of Damascus, why is it so significant? The word Damascus appears in the Torah itself, not just in the later prophets, but it's in the Chumash. And not only is it in the Chumash, it's mentioned even before Jerusalem is mentioned. Before we see anything about Yerushalayim, we already hear about Damascus. In fact, they're both mentioned for the first time in the same chapter in the Torah. In Bereshit chapter 14, Genesis chapter 14. That's the story of the War of the Kings. That's right. So first what happens is there's a confederation of 4 kings from the Middle East, from Mesopotamia, who invade the Holy Land and fight a confederation of 5 kings from the Sodom and Gomorrah region. And so you have 5 kings around Sodom, around the Dead Sea area, going to war with 4 kings from Mesopotamia. And the 4 kings from Mesopotamia win the war and take hostages. And Abraham hears that there are hostages, including his nephew Lot. So he goes to war specifically to save the hostages. Might sound familiar, right, to what's going on right now. And in that chapter, it says that Abraham went as far that he and his helper, his servants, Va'avadav, Vayakem ve'yirdafem ad chova asher mismol laDamasek, that he pursued the armies all the way as far north as Damascus. That's where Damascus is first mentioned. In the context of this huge war in the Middle East, with Abraham trying to free some hostages. History repeats itself. Then we read that in this war, of course, he takes with him his soldiers, 318 men, but the Gemara tells us famously that they were not 318. What does the Gemara say? Eliezer. That it was Eliezer, right? That Eliezer, the gematria of Eliezer, happens to be 318. So Chazal say that he didn't actually have 318 soldiers, because where did Abraham, this teacher, this peaceful person, a person who was known for his chesed, his kindness, his charity, how did he suddenly get 318 fighters to take on 4 massive armies of these great Mesopotamian kings? So the Gemara says, no, it wasn't 308. He didn't have 300. It was his servant Eliezer. Eliezer's gematria is 318. So it was actually a special forces mission. This was Duvdevan, whatever it was, 2 people, Abraham and Eliezer, going on a special forces mission and rescuing hostages. That's what the Gemara says. It's a code, 318 is a code word for Eliezer. And then in the following chapter, God comes to Abraham, and Abraham says, listen, I have no children. Who's going to inherit I have nothing. I'm going to die without a child. And the person who's going to inherit my household, Uven Meshek Beiti, Hu Damasek Eliezer. So it's in the following chapter where we're told that Eliezer is from Damascus. Now, in this war, in chapter 14, when Avram comes back victorious from the war, he has liberated the hostages, somebody comes out to greet him. Who is that person? Melchizedek, right? Melchizedek melech Shalem, the king of Shalem, hotzi lechem ve'yain ve'u kohen le'el elyon. So very puzzling verse. Melchizedek is a Kohen. This is really the first place where the Torah speaks about a Kohen, which is strange because Kohanim are supposed to be the descendants of Aaron. But Aaron won't be alive for hundreds of years. So who's this Kohen? Right? Melchizedek is a Kohen. The Torah clearly says he's a Kohen le'el elyon. He's not a Kohen to some other foreign deity. He's not an idolatrous high priest. He is a high priest to God, to Hashem, to El Elyon, to the one supernal, supreme God. And he is the king of Shalem. What is Shalem? Shalem is Yerushalayim. It's the same place. The king of Salem is Jerusalem. Right? And our tradition is, the Torah doesn't say this explicitly, but our tradition is, who is Melchizedek? Shem. Right? Shem, the son of Noach. How do we know that Melchizedek is Shem, the son of Noach? What is the clue to that? There's a few reasons why we say that. First of all, because there were really only 3 great monotheists in the world at this time. Abraham is one. Yeah, Noach at this point is no longer with us. So Abraham is one, Shem is the other, and Ever, Abraham's great-great-great-grandfather, Ever. These are the 3, and we have a tradition that Shem and Ever had a yeshiva, they taught. So we hear all about Abraham. Where's Shem? Shem is still alive. The Torah says Shem lived 500 more years after the flood. And the flood was in 1656 on the Jewish calendar dating. Add another 500 years from 1656. It's 2156. Abraham was born in 1948 of the Jewish calendar. Right? The state of Israel was born in 1948 of the secular calendar. Abraham was born in 1948 of the Jewish calendar. That's not a coincidence. So this is happening. Shem is still alive at the time of Abraham, and we know that Shem and Abraham interacted with each other. So where's Shem? Shem is Melchizedek, and he is a Kohen. Why is he the Kohen? Because remember, after the flood, Noach brought sacrifices. The Torah says that after the flood, Noach brought sacrifices. Right? He took 2 of every animal onto the ark, and he took 7 of the kosher animals. The Torah says that explicitly. He took more kosher animals, and then he was able to bring some offerings after the flood. Where did he bring offerings? You might think that he brought the offerings on Mount Ararat, where the ark rested. But that's not really the case, because God chose one place for offerings to be brought to him. The Torah always says, Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place that God chooses is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is God's beloved place, where he wants all the offerings to come to him through Jerusalem. Jerusalem is like the stargate to the heavens, right? It's Even Hashtiyah, it's the foundation stone. God wants good, proper offerings to Hashem are in Jerusalem. We're at the Temple Mount. So the tradition is that Noach brought offerings to God on the Temple Mount. And to bring offerings, what do you need? You need a Kohen. You can't just go and sacrifice your own goats and sheep and whatever, doves and cows, and say that I'm doing it. You need a Kohen to do that. The Kohen is the facilitator of sacrifices. So who was Noach's Kohen? His son Shem, right? Shem was the first Kohen. That's why the Torah says Melchizedek was the first Kohen. That's why you have Shem here, who's called Melchizedek. And why does he have a new name? He hasn't. Some people say actually Melchizedek is a title, because Melchizedek literally just means righteous king. So he's just the righteous king of Shalem. He's been living here since the flood. This is where they settled afterwards. This is where they brought sacrifices. He is the king of this place. He is the righteous king, Melchizedek. But there's another explanation for it too, because remember, after the Tower of Babel, after Migdal Bavel, everybody's names changed. Because God confounded their languages, so everybody's names changed. And we see that explicitly, like Amraphel, who's mentioned in the War of the Kings. Who is Amraphel? Chazal say that he was Nimrod. Nimrod became Amraphel. So everybody's names changed. That makes sense. If their languages changed, their names changed. So Shem became Melchizedek. And he is like this first priest in Jerusalem, the king of Shalem. How do we know Shalem is Jerusalem? And how did Shalem become Yerushalayim? The Midrash famously explains this. I'm sure you've heard. How did Shalem become Yerushalayim? Good, because later when God told Abraham to bring Yitzhak there for the Akedah, Abraham bound Yitzhak on that same place, on Har Moriah, Mount Moriah, on that same foundation stone. And the Torah clearly says that Veikra Avraham Shem HaMakom Ha'u Hashem Yireh. Abraham called that place Hashem Yireh. And the Midrash says that Shem Kara Oto Shalem. Shem, Melchizedek, when he built the first city there, he said, no, he called that place Shalem, which means wholesome, peaceful. It was the perfect place. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Im kore'ani oto yireh, keshem shekara oto Avraham. If I call this place Yireh like Avraham calls it, that's going to be disappointing to Shem. That's going to be an affront to Shem, who was also righteous. So each one's going to complain. If I go with Avraham and call it Yireh, then Shem's going to be disappointed. And then it's disrespectful to Shem, who's this righteous man. If I call it Shalem, that's disrespectful to Abraham, who's this great righteous man. So what did God do? Put them together. Ela hareni koreh oto Yerushalayim, kmo shekaru shnehem, yireh Shalem Yerushalayim. Put it all together. So that's what the Midrash explains the etymology of Jerusalem. Jerusalem comes from these two names. Abraham called it Yireh, Shem called it Shalem. God said, put it together, Yerushalayim. And that's where it comes from. So Yerushalayim also first appears in the Torah in Genesis chapter 14. 3 verses after Damascus first appears. These two cities are forever linked. Jerusalem and Damascus. From the very beginning of the Torah. From Bereshit, from Sefer Bereshit. It's like this ancient connection that goes all the way to the very beginning. Now Shem is really important. And this also has a connection to what's going on in Syria now. We read earlier in the Torah in chapter 10 that Shem had a few sons in the table of nations, in the 70 nations that make up the root nations of the world. The sons of Shem were Bnei Shem, Elam, Ve'ashur, Ve'arpachshad, Ve'lud, Ve'aram. 5 sons. These are very important. Elam is the Elamites, the forefather of the Elamites. Ashur is Assyria. Ashur is the biblical name for Syria. Ashur was the son of Shem. The founder of Syria, the original ancient founder of Syria, is the son of Shem. Arpachshad is actually our forefather because Arpachshad was the father of Ever. Ever is the forefather of all the Ivrim, of the Hebrews. The first Hebrew was Ever. Abraham comes from Ever. So we come from the Arpachshad line. And then you have Lud ve'Aram. Aram is the Arameans. And Aram is the founder of Damascus. Damascus was originally, today it's the capital of Syria. It originally was the capital of Aram until Assyria took it over. And the Tanakh explains that as well. We're going to come back to that. Ishayahu tells us about that. How did the capital of Aram end up becoming the capital of Syria? So it's all mentioned here. These are all children of Shem. Damascus was founded by Shem's son also, Aram. And Assyria is Shem's son, Ashur. Now, what's the connection to what's going on in the Middle East now? You know the name of the, no longer, I guess, terror group. Now they're freedom fighters. But the terrorists formerly terrorists that are now the new Syrian regime. Do you know what their group is called? They renamed themselves. They used to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda, but they detached from Al-Qaeda in 2016, and they wanted to be more diplomatic and not to be associated with terrorists. So they renamed themselves to Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. Right? They are the Syria Conquest Front, and they are named Al-Sham because in Arabic, they call this region Al-Sham. They call it Sham. It's the land of Shem. Syria is called, they call it Syria too, but it's actually called Sham, this region. And it has many Arabic explanations of what it means, the land of to the left side, to the west side, but it literally just means the land of Sham is the land of Shem. And so this new regime actually calls itself the conquest front of Shem, appropriately enough, very interestingly. So Shem reappears again. Right? Shem was there in the Torah times, and he's back in the news today. So Shem is really the spiritual founder of both Jerusalem and Damascus and Aram and Syria. So all of this, it's all linked together. Now there's a more profound link between Jerusalem and Damascus. And Chazal points this out. If you look at the letters of Damascus, they have the exact same letters and of course the same gematria as another word, which is Mikdash. Right? If you rearrange the Mesek, it's the same exact words as Mikdash, the temple, the sanctuary, the holy temple. Why is Damascus the same letters and the same numerical value? Right? If two things have a numerical same equivalence, there's some connection there. The Torah is mathematical, just like the universe is mathematical. It's all codes and formulas. So if the Torah has this mathematical equivalence, why does Damascus have the same numerical value as Jerusalem's holy temple, as Mikdash? Damascus and Mikdash, same letters, same numbers. So there's a spiritual connection. There's also a historical connection. This is something that's going to surprise you. If you're not so familiar with Tanakh, which most of us aren't because we don't give it enough attention, right? We always have to be reading Tanakh. I say this all the time. We always have to be reading Tanakh nonstop. You never stop reading Tanakh. You finish, you start again from the beginning, and you keep going. Because you'll read it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and you'll still forget. You'll still overlook passages like this. What's the connection between the Jerusalem temple, the Mikdash, the Beit HaMikdash, and Damascus? There's a very important historical link that the Tanakh tells us. There was a point in the time of King Achaz. King Achaz was the king of Yehuda, the king of Judah. And at one point, there was a civil war between Judah and Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, the kingdom split, right? After King Solomon, the kingdom split. Achaz was the king of the south of Judea, and Pekach was the king of the north. of Israel. And Pekach allied with Aram, with Damascus, to destroy Judea. And the Torah tells us that Achaz was scared. So what did he do? He took all the money and all the gold and the silver that he had in the holy temple in Jerusalem. And he sent all that money as tribute to the king of Assyria. The king of Ashur, who was Tiglat-Pileser, hears Veya'al melech Ashur al Damascus ve'itpesa ve'igla kira ve'et retzin hemit. So Assyria takes the tribute. Assyria and Judea make an alliance and go to war against Israel and Damascus, and the Assyrians capture Damascus. And then what happens? This is the important part. Vayelech melech Achaz likrat Tiglat-Pileser melech Ashur Damascus. Here it's spelled Dumesek. That Achaz went to Damascus to meet the Assyrian king Tiglat-Pileser. Vayar et hamizbeach asher b'Damasek veishlach hamelech Achaz el Uriah Kohen et dmut hamizbeach ve'et tavnito. So Achaz goes to Damascus. He sees the temple in Damascus, and he is blown away by it. He says, wow, this is a beautiful temple. Our temple in Jerusalem is not as nice as this temple in Damascus. So he sends the blueprints of the Damascus temple, the altar and everything, the Mizbeach, Tavnito. He sends it to Uriah Kohen, the high priest in Israel. In Jerusalem is Uriah at this time. He sends him the drawings. And what does Uriah do? Vayiven Uriah Kohen et hamizbeach kechol asher shalach hamelech Achaz miDamasek. So Uriah rebuilt the Jerusalem temple to the specifications of the temple in Damascus. So again, you have a very deep historical link between these two cities. There's deep mystical significance to this too. The Tanakh is telling us the story, that's the historical thing, but we still have to uncover what exactly is the link between Jerusalem and Damascus. And that link exists to this day, because you've probably all been to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem has a number of gates all around the old city, and probably the most famous gate of Jerusalem is called the Damascus Gate. So to this day, Jerusalem's old city has a Damascus Gate. And it's a very popular one. It's like there's always stuff going on over there. There's protests going on over there. There's lots of people there always. It's one of the busiest gates. Shar Shechem, we call it, but its English name is the Damascus Gate. And what's amazing about the Damascus Gate is that right next to it, and this is something that I didn't know, God willing, when I go to Israel, God willing, next month, I will try to check it out. Next to the Damascus Gate, apparently, as I was doing some research about the Damascus Gate, is something called Zedekiah's Cave. Anybody ever heard of this? That King Zedekiah, who was the last king of Israel, or Judea, when the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem, apparently this is where he fled, to this massive cave underground, under Jerusalem. It's also called Solomon's Quarries, because apparently that's also where there's a tradition that Solomon got stones for the temple from there. But it's like an absolutely massive complex of caves under Jerusalem. When we read the Zohar prophecy about the Star of Jacob, remember it says once there's this shakeup in Israel, this 45-mile shakeup in Jerusalem, then there will be this cave that will be revealed from under Jerusalem, and Mashiach will come from that cave, apparently. So maybe that's the cave. It seems like this is that massive complex of caves under Jerusalem. And it's possible also, some say, that maybe the Ark of the Covenant is somewhere there, in some hidden crevice in the cave that we don't know, that's unexplored. Maybe the Ark of the Covenant is there too, the return of which we await. So it's possible. Maybe Mashiach is going to go there, find the Ark of the Covenant, pull it out. Maybe that's where it's all coming from. Tzidkiyahu's cave. And Tzidkiyahu was the last king of Judea, of the Davidic dynasty. So it's symbolic that the restoration of the Davidic dynasty would come from that cave, from under Jerusalem, the entrance to which is next to the Damascus Gate. So I actually found fact, as I was reading about this, apparently for Freemasons, this is like one of their holiest sites in the world. And apparently Freemasons do some bizarre rituals over there, I don't know. So for all the Freemason conspiracy theory people out there, apparently there's a Freemasonry connection to this cave, but I don't know anything about it. So the Zohar only mentions, as far as I know, Damascus in one place. Damascus is mentioned in one place in the Zohar that I found. And it's in a place that describes how Yechezkel foresaw the third temple. After Ezekiel gives the prophecy of Gog and Magog, right after that, of his end of days prophecies, he describes the final temple. And it's this massive, huge temple, the third temple. And he describes how he measures it with a measuring rod, or a particular reed, whatever it is, a measuring line, a measuring stick. And the Zohar points out something interesting. It says in Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah, chapter 9, mentions that it says Damascus will be menuchato, that Damascus will be his resting place, or his presence will rest in Damascus. Whose presence? It's not clear. It seems to say that God's presence will rest in Damascus. So the Zohar says, when? How? Since when? Since when is God's presence in Damascus? God's presence is in Jerusalem. The Shekhinah is in Jerusalem. How do we get to Damascus? So the Zohar is saying, based on Yechezkel's vision of this grand third temple, the Zohar is saying what's going to happen is the third temple will stretch all the way to Damascus. And that will be the fulfillment of this prophecy, that God's presence will rest at the end of days, even in Damascus. Now, that's hard to understand literally. There's no way that this building is going to be so big that it's going to stretch from Jerusalem to Damascus over all the hills and mountains and the Jordan River. So what does it really mean? A few ways to look at it. One, we can look at it as Ishayahu says the third temple will be an international temple. The third temple will be a place for everybody. Everybody will be welcome there. Unlike now, where the Waqf doesn't allow really anybody to go to the Temple Mount, or it's very restricted how you go there and what you can do there, although some people in Israel are trying to change that. When the third temple is rebuilt, that place will be a place for everybody. Ishayahu says it'll be an international Beit Tfilah, right? We've read this many times. It will be Lechol Ha'amim. All the nations of the world will be welcome on the Temple Mount and in the third temple. So one way to look at it is, the Zohar is saying that even Damascus will have access to the Jerusalem temple. Even you will feel the presence of Jerusalem as far away as Damascus. And you'll be able to ascend, make an aliyah from Damascus to Jerusalem to the third temple. That's one way to understand it, that there will be an era of peace and that all these borders and minefields and barrier regions and all these things in between right now, Israel and Syria, will open up and everybody will be welcome to go to the temple, even from Jerusalem, for all nations, from all peoples. And the Midrash actually reinforces that. The Zohar is actually drawing from an earlier Midrash, from Sifrei Dvarim. And the Sifrei Dvarim says this, same thing. It quotes this first verse in Zechariah chapter 9. Zechariah chapter 9 begins by saying, Masad Dvar Hashem be'eretz Hadrach u'Damasek menuchato. That's how it starts. That's a prophecy for Eretz Hadrach and Damascus menuchato. What does that mean? So the Midrash says, Chadrach, who's Chadrach? Ze Mashiach. Chadrach is another name for Mashiach. She'u chad le'umot verach le'Israel, because he will be sharp for the nations and soft for Israel. And Amar lo Rabbi Yossi says, no, that's not right. He says, She'ani mi Damascus, I come from Damascus. Rabbi Yossi says, I'm from Damascus, and you're saying it all wrong. Yesh shem makom sheshmo Chadrach. There is a place in Damascus named Chadrach. Doesn't mean it has nothing to do with Mashiach. It's a literal place in Damascus called Chadrach. So what does this mean? Damascus menuchato. How do you understand that, right? Minayin she'atida Yerushalayim liot migat ad Damascus. That Jerusalem in the future will expand and its borders will go all the way to Damascus. That the borders of Jerusalem will expand to Damascus. And that's why it says Damascus menuchato. That in the future, Jerusalem and Damascus will be linked into one holy city. It'll all be part of one territory. Ein menuchato ele Yerushalayim. As we know, menuchato refers to God's presence dwells in Jerusalem. Now, it's important to remember that, again, going back to Tanakh, it's not just that Damascus might be part of Israel or Jerusalem in the end of days. It was already once part of Israel, because King David actually did conquer Damascus at one point. וישם דוד ניצבים בארם דמשק, ותהי ארם לדוד לעבדים נושאי מנחה. That Aram became a tribute kingdom to King David and paid him tribute. He actually conquered. He had his soldiers stationed in Damascus. King David did. So it was actually part of King David's kingdom at one point. They paid tribute to King David's kingdom. Even now, I mean, Damascus is very close to Israel. It's only like an hour away from Mount Hermon, even less, to drive. I'm going to talk about Hermon after. Remember Hermon, because Hermon, there's a very important end of days prophecy about Hermon, which I'm going to get to. So the Midrash continues and says that Israel will broaden in the end of days, Jerusalem will broaden in the end of days. That's why in Shir HaShirim, there's a pasuk that says, Apech kemigdal halevanon, and then Tzofeh pnei Damascus. That's the secret of that verse that mentions Lebanon and Damascus. Think about everything we've said about Lebanon and Damascus. In Shir HaShirim, that's the secret meaning of that verse, that Israel will expand. And ultimately it says that the exiles will be able to come to Israel and settle even in this region. Okay. Vaya be'acharit hayamim, it's quoting this prophecy that all the nations, that Israel will come back, that the Jewish people will come back to Israel, and that they'll even be able to settle in this area. So, some of the Jewish communities, the Syrian Jewish community, one of the most, big and illustrious Jewish community that after 1948 was completely crushed. Many Jews throughout history lived in Syria. Even Rav Chaim Vital. Rav Chaim Vital lived in Damascus. And his collection of writings of the Arizal were housed in Damascus for many years before they were revealed to the world. You've heard of the Aleppo Codex, one of the most ancient manuscripts of the Torah. The Aleppo Codex was there. So very important community, and maybe there will be an opportunity for Syrian Jews to return and get some of the things they left behind back. So the Midrash says that Jews will be able to, in the end of days, to come and settle and live in this area again. And it'll be part of the Holy Land too. God's presence will extend as far as Damascus in the end of days. The basis for all of this is Zedekiah chapter 9. So I'm going to go through it very, very quickly, because Zedekiah chapter 9 is super important. It starts by saying, Masad dvar Hashem be'eretz chadrach, like we just said, ve'Damasek menuchato. That's how the prophecy begins. A prophecy for Damascus. And then, listen to this, the next verse, unbelievable. Ve'gam chamat tigbal ba tzor ve'tzidon ki chachama me'od. Look what it says, the next verse. That included in this will be chamat. What is Hamat? Do you know? Hamat is what the rebels captured last week, the big news. The city of Homs. Homs is Hamat. Remember, it's a tha, Hamath. Right? And that's literally, look up the etymology of Homs. Homs is Hamath. I guess the Syrians are Ashkenazi. They say it with a sav. So Hamath is Homs in Syria. That was the first city that fell last week when the big news broke. So the prophecy says, Gam Hamat will be there, and Tzor and Sidon. Tzor and Sidon we talked about last time in the Lebanon class. Tzor and Sidon is Lebanon. Remember, Nasrallah's family is from Tzor, from Tyre. Nasrallah's family is Tyrians. So that too will fall, all of this together at the end of days. And that there's going to be, that they're going to be able to extract money from there. That they're going to find so much money. Listen to what it says. Titzbar kesef ke'afar v'charutz ketit chutzot. That there will be money, gold and silver will be found there like dust in the street. And if you remember the news from a few weeks ago, what did the IDF find under a Beirut hospital, which was served as a Hezbollah headquarters as well? 500 million in cash and gold bars. Right? The IDF found. So this is mamash happening now. Think about the Hamasnik, all the Hamas leaders who are all billionaires. You've seen this, the net worth of all the Hamas leaders? They're all billionaires. Right. All this money that the West has been throwing at them, that all the leftists, all the supporters of these monsters have been sending them, all the pro-Palestine people, where's that money going? People think it's going to the poor children in Gaza. Of course, it's not going to the poor children in Gaza. It's going to the rich leaders of Hamas. So this is what's happening. God is saying all that money is going to come out now. All these billions that they've amassed, that they've stolen. All these people in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, the Palestinians, I mean, they live in poverty while their leaders rake in all their riches. Assad, Nasrallah, Hania, they're all the same. They're all plunderers. They're all thieves. They're all thieves, and they use propaganda to brainwash people. Yeah, you know how it is. Okay. Zedekiah, chapter 9, verse 5. Tere Ashkelon ve'Tira ve'Aza, Gaza, will tremble violently. Ve'Tachil me'od, ve'Ekron ki hovish. So all these places were Philistine cities. Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron. Ashkelon today is not the same as Ashkelon, the archaeological, historical Ashkelon, and Ashdod as well. There's Israeli cities, Ashkelon and Ashdod, are nearby the old Philistine cities of Ashkelon and Ashdod, which have been destroyed. You can go to the ruins. You can go to the archaeological parks. They're near the current cities, but not the same. So God is saying Gaza will tremble violently, and specifically, ve'avad melech me'aza, that Gaza will lose its king. Gaza will lose its leader. And ve'ichrati ge'on plishtim, and I will destroy the pride of the Philistines. Okay, we've seen that all happen in the past year. So this is Zedekiah's prophecy. And this is the next verse that's the most important. And we can really just stop here. Because right after this, verse 9, what's going to happen in the context of all of this? You ready? You've all heard this verse many times. Anybody know what it is? Verse 9. You've all heard it, I promise you, many, many times. Now, God says, Gili me'od bat Zion. Okay, Zionists, rejoice. Okay? Israel, the Jewish people, you should rejoice. Ari bat Yerushalayim, shout out the daughter of Jerusalem. And this is the verse that you've heard many, many times. Ine malkech yavolach, your king will come to you. Tzadik venosha, vehu ani verochev al chamor. Right? Your Messiah will come to you, humble and righteous, riding on a donkey. This is where it comes from. That's where that prophecy is from.
Is Esav the donkey?
Esav?
No.
Ishmael. Well, yeah, we say Chamor is an allusion to Ishmael.
Right.
That's a very good point, because nobody is going to be riding a donkey today. But who is he riding upon? All right, what is this conflict happening right now? Yeah, he's on top of Chamor. That's a great point. So it's in the context of this war. It's in the context of the fall of Damascus, the fall of Gaza. These are the places that are named. So this is bad news for the Christians, because Christians think this was fulfilled by Jesus 2,000 years ago when he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. But that completely takes the verse out of context. It happens in the context of a war, a massive regional war in which Damascus falls and Gaza falls and the Philistines are destroyed. Did any of that happen in the time of Jesus? None of that happened. This will happen in the context of this great war, which it looks like we're in now, because it's pretty one-to-one that this is happening. Zedekiah is predicting this, and we're seeing this. Mamash, the same place names like now. Gaza, Tyre, Damascus, everything that we're seeing now. And it ends with a promise that everybody will return. Shuvu levitzaron asirei tikva. Those who are imprisoned will return. Yeah, there's hope for those who are imprisoned. You will all return, God says. God willing soon. And then it talks about how the shofar, God will blow the shofar. B'shofar itka, this is the great shofar at the end of days. And ve'alach b'sa'arot Teiman. And there will also be a tempest for Teiman. Teiman means south, but Teiman is Yemen today. So for the Houthis that are also just sent now, the Houthis sent a missile now that landed in Yavne. So the Houthis that keep trying to send rockets, their end is coming too. And God is saying ultimately the land will prosper. Ki avnei nezer mitnosesot al admato. So God's soil will sparkle with crown jewels in the end of the day. That's how it ends. So again, this prophecy of Damascus, which the Midrash and the Zohar are quoting from, chapter 9 of Zedekiah, is all about the whole Mashiach thing. And Mashiach riding on a donkey comes from here in the midst of this war. And Micha chapter 5 does the same. Micha chapter 5 is talking about Assyria, not Damascus, but Ashur. And Micha chapter 5 begins by again talking about Mashiach. V'ata Betlechem Ephrata. So remember, we know King David came from Bethlehem, and Mashiach is a descendant, Mashiach ben David. Mimcha li yetze liot moshel beYisrael, umotzotav mikedem mimei olam. God is saying, I picked that person from the beginning of the world, from creation, from the very start of creation. I already picked one soul to be Mashiach, and I'm going to come back to that at the very end. I'm going to finish with that. Something really, an incredible insight that I think you'll like. So that person, he will be like King David, like a shepherd of God. Then it says, if, v'haya zeh shalom Ashur ki yavo be'artzenu, it's translated as, if Assyria should invade our land, if Assyria should try to destroy Israel, then God will raise, v'akimenu alav shiva roim u'shmona nesichei adam. God will raise 7 shepherds and 8 princes to defeat Assyria so that they will not trample our border. So it's almost like a conditional prophecy. If Assyria is going to invade at the end of days, God will raise up 7 shepherds and 8 princes to destroy Assyria. It's very interesting. It says if. So I say it's the if because regarding this new Syrian regime, what will they be? Will they make a peace treaty with Israel, or are they going to be going to war with it? Is this a good thing for Israel or a bad thing for Israel? And I think this conditional prophecy in Michayahu is really important because it's saying if Assyria at the end of days will wish to go to war with Israel, they will be destroyed. Right? So you have a new regime, you have a new opportunity. This is the message to Assyria. You have an opportunity to make peace. Take that opportunity, Syria. Don't continue Assad's old ways. You guys decide how you want to do this, right? Do you want to continue the old ways and suffer, or do you want to make peace and let's have peaceful borders, let's see a Beit HaMikdash, let's live together in harmony? Ultimately, Micha concludes by saying that She'erit Yaakov, all over the world, Bekerev Amim Rabim, that are amidst all the many peoples, will also be delivered, will be saved, and will be strong, and will ultimately come back to Israel. So it's important to remember that a lot of people ask, should I move to Israel now? If you can, yes, sure. But you should know, just so you know, God says, don't worry, that all the people who are She'erit Yaakov Bekerev Amim, they're leftovers who didn't make it, who are going to be among the nations, God will take care of us too, don't worry. So God takes care of all his children. I know many people ask me regularly, should I move to Israel now? Should I move to Israel now? Yes, if you can, sure. Absolutely, it's a huge mitzvah. But if not, don't panic, don't stress. God promises that he'll take care of all the Jews all over the world. Don't worry. That's Michayahu. His contemporary Ishayahu, we want to go through all the as many prophecies as we can. Ishayahu chapter 17 also prophesies the destruction of Damascus. I'm not going to go through it. We're running out of time. But that's important. Ishayahu chapter 17 is important because that goes through how Damascus transitioned from being Aramaean to Assyrian. Because the Assyrians conquered Damascus, and then after that it became a major Assyrian city, and eventually the capital of Syria. So Ishayahu chapter 17 is about the evolution of Damascus from Aramaic to Assyrian. And the important one that I do want to focus on is Jeremiah chapter 49. This one's going to be really interesting. Yirmiyahu chapter 49 says this. Again, it's a double-level prophecy. All these things that we're discussing are what's called double-level prophecies, right? They're describing events in those days. Ishayahu and Michayahu, they're describing what's happening in their time. So Michayahu chapter 5, you can understand that as having been fulfilled by Hezekiah. King Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, was from Bethlehem. He did stand up to the Assyrians who tried to invade. Very famous thing. We have archaeological evidence even that God spared Hezekiah from the Assyrians and they went back to Nineveh, back to Ashur. So you could read this all. You can read all of these as having been fulfilled in their time. You can read Yechezkel describing the temple as the second temple. It's both. He's talking about the rebuilt second temple and the future third temple. You can read Micha chapter 5 as talking about Hezekiah's time and at the end of days. Same thing with Ishayahu chapter 17 and Yirmiyahu chapter 49. These are double-level prophecies because the Tanakh serves two purposes. On the one hand, it's a history book. It tells us what happened in the past. But on the other hand, it's a prophecy book. Everything in Tanakh is prophetic. It's supposed to be relevant to us now. It's not just a textbook about what happened in the past. That's actually even less important. It's more important to understand what's happening now. So the Zohar actually says that a person who reads the Tanakh or the Torah solely as history is a sinner. You can't read Tanakh as only history. That's wrong. The Tanakh is not a history textbook. Tanakh is alive. Tanakh is also past, present, and future. So you also have to read the Tanakh, understand its significance for what's to come. So these are all double-level prophecies. So Yirmiyahu is talking about, on the surface, about how Damascus will be destroyed by the Babylonians. But there's also prophecy there for us, and you'll see how amazing this prophecy is. He says, "Let Damascus busha chamath." Again, chamath, Homs will be busha, will be embarrassed. Damascus will fall. It will be seized by chavalim keyoleda, by birth pangs. We've seen that term many times before. And ve'itzati esh bechomat Damascus, I will send fire to the walls of Damascus. Ve'ochla armanot ben Hadad, and the palace of Ben Hadad will be destroyed. That's what Yirmiyahu says. Who is Ben Hadad? Ben Hadad is probably the most frequent Aramaean Damascene person named in Tanakh. He is mentioned many times in Tanakh. Ben Hadad was a great king of the Aramaeans in Damascus, had a very fancy palace in Damascus. And we read in Tanakh many places that he went to war with Israel. And not successfully. The Tanakh describes at least 2 times where he went to war and fled and had to retreat. Think about Syria trying a couple of times at least to conquer Israel and ultimately fleeing and retreating. So in his day in Damascus as well, he tried to conquer Israel and failed multiple times. That's Ben Hadad. But Ben Hadad was so important that his name carried on for many centuries, even to the time of Jeremiah. Jeremiah lived long after Ben Hadad. But by that point, Ben Hadad was symbolic for the royal family of Damascus. It's like a name for the whole place, like Pharaoh. Pharaoh means not any one particular person. Pharaoh literally means great house or royal house. It referred to the house of the palace of the king of Egypt, but it came to be that all of them were called Pharaoh. Ben Hadad is kind of the same. Ben Hadad ended up being used as a title for later leaders of Damascus also. So Jeremiah, who lived long after Ben Hadad, is saying the palace of Ben Hadad will be destroyed. Now, this is the amazing thing. This is something that I've known this is not something I just discovered last week. This is something I wrote about many, many years ago. That the gematria of Ben Hadad, if you do the math quickly in your head, Ben Hadad is 65, right? Ben is 52, Hadad, Hey, Daled, 544. What else is 65? Asad. Asad, Aleph, Samech, Daled, 65. Asad is 65 too, like Ben Hadad. Same. And think about, I don't know if you've seen the images and videos coming from Damascus the last few days. The Syrians are plundering Assad's palace in Damascus. People are just walking freely into his house, taking things. Exactly like Yirmiyahu was saying, that the palaces of Ben Hadad will be plundered. And Ben Hadad, again, is used as a title for whoever is the leader of Damascus, like Pharaoh, is called Ben Hadad. And we're seeing that happening right now when the current Ben Hadad is having his palace plundered by the people, just like Yirmiyahu says. Remember, a while back, we did the class on the Jewish-Muslim history, and there's this amazing prophecy in the Zohar that says at the end of days, God will bring back all the ancient tormentors of Israel. God will bring them back, reincarnate them. They will all live again, and God will punish them again for the last time. They're going to try to torment Israel again, like they did in a past life, and God will finish them off for good. And last time we talked about that, referring to Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein believed himself to be the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. He said it over and over again. He literally lived like Nebuchadnezzar. He built his palace on the old archaeological ruins of Nebuchadnezzar's palace. He minted coins that put his face overlaid with Nebuchadnezzar's face. He wrote inscriptions about himself in the walls of archaeological sites about Nebuchadnezzar. Like, that's how obsessed he was with this link. He fully believed he was Nebuchadnezzar of the now. And the Zohar says this will happen. The Zohar says all these tormentors and mentions these people, Nebuchadnezzar, Titus, all these people who in the past tormented us, Sancheriv, they will all come back and God will punish them at the end of days. So we saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. It's not unlikely that Assad is a reincarnation of Ben-Hadad, in the fulfillment of this prophecy. Who knows? Maybe. It's very possible in light of that prophecy. And again, their numerical value, interestingly enough, is the same. And it's just fun to note that Hadad was one of the gods of the Arameans. So Ben-Hadad means like son of that god, which, in pagan cultures that was common. A lot of pharaohs named themselves as son of this god, son of that god, right? Like Ramses. Ramses means son of Ra. So Ben-Hadad, son of Hadad. Kings like that stuff. Kings like to pretend that they're sons of God, that they're royal, that they're deities. So in pagan cultures, it was common to believe that a certain leader is the son of God. Also in some pagan religions today. But Ben-Hadad is a son of God, right? But interestingly enough, Hadad is a very common Arabic name today. It means blacksmith in Arabic. And Jew, yeah. But it's a different letter. Hadad is with a hey. Hadad is with a het. And so it's almost the same. But I think that's not a coincidence, because Hadad is mentioned in the Torah too, in Bereshit. Because remember, Ishmael, the forefather of the Muslims and the Arabs, Ishmael had 12 sons, 12 tribes. Just like Israel had 12 tribes. And the Zohar and the Midrash puts the two against each other, like as if these are counter forces, spiritual forces. Israel has 12 sons, 12 tribes. Ishmael has 12 sons, 12 tribes. The elder was Nevayot. We talked about Nevayot last time as the forefather of the Nabatean Arabs, and each of them are a different clan of Arabs. And one of them is Hadad, one of the sons of Ishmael. So this is a name for Arabs going back all the way to Ishmael for Arabic peoples. It means blacksmith in Arabic today, but I think there's a connection there as well between Hadad, the name for the leader of Damascus, and Hadad, which is an Arabic name, the son of Ishmael. Not Hadad, which would be a chaf. Just to remember that there's 3 different sounds here. There's a hey, there's a ha, and there's a cha. So it's not actually Chanukah, because it's a het, right? So you remember that there are 3 different sounds here. But they're hard to say. And so you have hey, and you have the throatier from the het and the chaf. Not the same letter, 3 different letters. Okay, I'm going to skip over Amos. Amos, I recommend that you read Amos chapter 1. Again, says a lot of what, it starts the same way as Yirmiyahu. Ko amar Hashem, thus says God, al shlosha pishei Damascus ve'al arba'a lo ashivenu. God is going to overlook 3 sins of Damascus, but on the 4th he won't. What is the 4th sin of Damascus? They were destroying Gilad, this land, this region around the Golan, with iron swords. And keep in mind, again, the war right now is called Haravot Barzel, it's the Iron Swords War. And again, Amos is saying what Yirmiyahu says, Ve'ochla armanot ben Hadad. I will plunder, I will consume the temples, the palace of Ben-Hadad. Same thing. And Amos does this again for all of Israel's enemies at the end of days. They all start the same. Ko amar Hashem, al shosha pish'ei, the next one, al shosha pish'ei Azza. For 3 sins of Gaza I will overlook. Ve'al arba'a lo ashivenu. But on the 4th I won't overlook. What's the 4th final sin of Gaza that God says, that's it, I'm done with Gaza? You know what it is? Amos says, Al haglotam galut shlema le'azgir le'edom, because they exiled people out on behalf of Edom. Think about everything we've said in recent months about who is Edom, what's going on in Israel, Russia connection, the hostages that were taken by Gaza on Putin's birthday. Yeah, Putin's birthday was October 7th. The war started on Putin's birthday on behalf of Edom. God is saying, I'm not going to forgive you for the people that you took hostage, exiled from their own lands, that you took them out of their land. That's the sin of Gaza that I will not forgive. And Amos continues, Al shlosha pishei, guess who's next? Tzor, Tyre. Here's Lebanon again. Al shlosha pishei Tzor. For 3 sins of Tyre I'll overlook. Ve'al arba'a lo ashivenu. Because they did the same. What did they do? Same language as Gaza. Galut shlema le'edom. Because they're working on behalf of Edom to exile the people of Israel from their land. Hamas, Hezbollah attacked Israel together. Don't forget, Hezbollah from October, same day, started launching rockets. They were supposed to invade with ground forces too. For some miraculous reason, they didn't, because that would have been even more catastrophic. And God is saying, I will destroy the palaces of Tyre, of Lebanon as well. Same language. So you see the same people. In all these prophecies, these places are given like exact by name. It's unambiguous. It's Gaza, it's Damascus, it's everything we're seeing in the news now. It's like reading the news. So read Amos by yourself and see what he says. It's amazing. So all these prophecies being realized before our eyes. Okay, let's conclude. The one prophecy that I'm sure you've all seen and received in WhatsApp messages and on TV and on your phones everywhere in email, you know what I'm talking about. This is not from Tanakh. This is a rabbinic prophecy from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai again, from the originator of the Zohar. And the way that it's been sent to me a million times in the last few days is quoting Otzar HaMidrashim. Now, Otzar Midrashim is actually from the 20th century. Otzar Midrashim is a collection of Midrashim that was put together in the 1900s by Rabbi Yehuda David Eisenstein. He collected smaller, little-known Midrashim into one text. So it's from Otzar Midrashim, which is a recent work. But the actual source for it, I happen to know the source because I wrote about it in 2020. So if you go on my website, there's an essay from 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago, about end-of-day secrets from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That was the name of the essay, End-of-Day Secrets from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Maybe I'll link to it in the YouTube video description. So back then I already wrote about it, so I knew this passage. It's not coming from Otzar Midrashim, which is a 20th century compilation. The source for it is from a book that was first published in the 7th century. So it really is an ancient midrash, and it's called Nistarot de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, The Secrets of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It was published even before the Zohar. So over there it says, this is the prophecy, and we want to pick it apart a little more than what we saw, than the little bit that we saw on TV. It says, V'zeh lecha ha'ot, this is the sign for you, K'she'ata ro'eh she'nafal neiron mizrachi she'bet Damascus, when you see that Nero in Damascus will fall. The Eastern Nero. Who was Nero? Nero was the Roman emperor. Nero was the Roman emperor 2,000 years ago who started the Great Revolt. The war between the Jews, Judea and Rome, 2,000 years ago, that ended with the destruction of the Second Temple, was started by Nero. He didn't live to see the end of it. It was concluded by Vespasian and Titus, but Nero started it. So Rashbi is saying, when you see the Nero of the East in Damascus fall, Nafla Malchut Bnei Mizrach, that kingdom, once it falls, Az Titzmacha Yeshua LeIsrael, then the redemption will come for Israel. So the Nero in Damascus has to fall first. Umashiach ben David ba, ve'yalu leYerushalayim, and then Mashiach ben David will come. And it gives a verse for that. Nero is interesting because in light of what we said about Saddam Hussein being Nebuchadnezzar and the Zohar saying that all the ancient oppressors will come back at the end of days, could it be that Assad is Nero? He might be Ben-Hadad, he might be Nero, he might be both. Because if you remember, we talked about in the class on reincarnation that wicked people get 3 chances to come back. So it's very possible that the original Ben-Hadad, the first oppressor of Israel, could have very well reincarnated in the Roman Emperor Nero, and he was wicked again, and he could very well reincarnate again, right? God gives a soul multiple chances, and the Arizal says that a wicked person gets 3 chances, 3 strikes, and then you're out. As long as you're improving with each life, you can reincarnate even 1,000 times. Notzer chesed la'alafim. But if you're getting worse with each reincarnation and more sinful, then God gives you 3 chances. So it's actually possible that this same soul is returning throughout history to be an oppressor, an opponent of Israel. Ben-Hadad, Nero, Assad, it's possible. So maybe that's why it says specifically Nero, because it's a strange term. Why call him Nero? Why not something else, right? So it could have just said the king in Damascus, but it says Nero. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe Rashbi is telling us that this person's the reincarnation of Nero. So we had Nebuchadnezzar, we have Ben-Hadad, we have Nero. That could be it. So that's actually how the Midrash ends. That's the last verse, the last sentence in the Midrash. But right before that, I think, is even more important. The passage right before that was not being shared in all these WhatsApp messages and posts. The passage right before, listen to this. The passage right before says, V'zeh lecha ha'ot she'ata ro'eh, another sign, Shavua echad tchilato, that in the final week before Mashiach comes, you remember the final week prophecy? We've talked about this many times too. The final 7 years, the final week of years before Mashiach comes. You remember what's supposed to happen in that final week? In the first year, B'shana Rishana Matar, first there will be strange rains and strange weather. And Uveshniya Chatzei Ra'av Mishtalchin. Remember, the arrows will be sent forth. And Ubashlishit Ra'av Gadol. And in the third year, a great famine. Uverevit Lo Rav Velo Sova. You remember this? We talked about it before multiple times. We talked about a year ago in the When is Mashiach Coming class, right? And we mapped it out. That exactly, we saw this in the last few years, that there was the pandemic, which is like the Ra'av Gadol. It wasn't a famine, but there are other sources that say it would be a pestilence, that it would be a dever. Not Ra'av Gadol, but dever Gadol. And that's what we saw, that we saw there was a pandemic, there was a partial recovery, a full recovery, and we mapped it out year by year from like 2019, 2020, 2021. And it took us to the 7th year to 2024. The 7th year, it says Milchamot. And at the end of the 7th, Mashiach ben David ba. So even a year ago already, even before that, a couple of years ago, we kind of laid out the 7 years. And year 7 would be 57, 84, 2024. And then the next year, God willing, is Mashiach ben David ba. So that's actually what it says. But what's amazing here, which we didn't see in the other sources, the Sanhedrin source, this is also mentioned in Sanhedrin, in the Midrash. I always quoted the Sanhedrin text in the Gemara. But what's not mentioned there and what is mentioned here is amazing. And this is going to blow your mind. Because here it also adds, what are you going to see during this time? Guess what? Veitzmach kochav echad b'mizrach, uverosho shevet, v'hu kochav shel Yisrael, shene'emar darach kochav miYaakov. Because this is the Star of Jacob prophecy again. You will see a comet that's going to appear. The Star of Jacob will come at the same time. That the other sources don't say it. So Rashbi is putting it all together for us and saying, with the Star of Jacob, with the comet, everything will make sense. And then Mashiach ben David will come. Now, the text here is a corrupted text. The Nistarot de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is a very ancient text. We don't have all of it. We have only a little bit. We only have a couple of pages of it. And the text here is broken. And it's broken because it doesn't tell us the whole 7 years. It says this is what will happen in 7 years, but it seemingly only says 5 years. So there's actually a mistake here in the text. And it has to be, we can fix it. You just have to bring Sanhedrin into this, combine them. Because there's a missing couple of verses here. So what it should read is, it mentions the 7 years, it mentions the Star of Jacob, but it doesn't mention what happens in year 6 and 7. So you got to put it together. So if you put it together, you blend it like we always do. That's how you make sense of Torah. It's a puzzle. You got to blend together sources. If you blend it together, it's all going to make sense. That then you're going to have, at the end, not in the 5th year, because this one ends by saying what's going to happen in the 5th year, and then the text ends. It's a broken text. So if you put it all together, 7th year there will be wars. That's 2024, 5784. At the end of the 7th year, there will be the Kochav Yaakov, and then Bezrat Hashem Mashiach ben David Yitzmach. That's how it ends. Make sense? Good. Yeah, so like we always said, 2025. I've always said 2025. Remember the Parashat Miketz, right? 2025 words in Parashat Miketz. Some people are emailing me saying, "Where you're wrong, Mashiach didn't come." I never said Mashiach. I always said 2025. Wait till 2026, then tell me if I'm wrong in 2026. Okay, so then we'll have to deal with it. Then I'll have to. Yeah. Right. So God willing, 2025 will be the year, based on all of these prophecies that we seem to be realizing before our eyes. That seems to, it's too perfect to not be it, you know what I mean? When prophecies are vague and you're okay, you're kind of bending it to make it fit, but you can't make up 3 buildings and a headquarters and a person died and the star on that day, on the 25th, on a Friday, it's too much. You can't just make this. So same thing with all of these things. So it's a little too perfect to ignore, and it does seem like this is really the time. Now, I said I would come back to Hermon, because Hermon is in the news now, because the IDF actually captured. Hermon was kind of split between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. And now the IDF has they've taken the buffer zone, they've pushed out the Syrian positions, they've taken the whole mountain, and they're promising to stay there as long as necessary, which probably just means forever, because they're not going to give it back. It's strategically super important. They're not going to give it back. But Hermon is not just important strategically, militarily, as the highest point in the area. Spiritually, it's really important. And it's connected again to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Everything goes back to Rashbi. Because if you remember, most of you weren't there, but a few years ago we did a class on Lag BaOmer about how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's death, which we commemorate on Lag BaOmer, it's described in the part of the Zohar called the Idra Zuta. And the Idra Zuta tells us how he died. And he died by reciting a verse. His breath left him as he was reciting a verse. That verse is from Psalm 133. Of course it's 133, because Lag BaOmer is 33, right? The 33rd day of the Omer. Psalm 133 only has 3 verses. It's one of the shortest psalms, only has 3 verses. The first verse, you all know. The first verse is, Ine matovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad, right? How great it is, we all know the song. Yeah? Ine matovu manaim. That's how it begins. How great it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together. But the third verse, this is how it ends. The third verse says, Ketal Hermon, like the dew on Mount Hermon, sheyored al hararei Tzion, that descends from the mountain upon Zion, Kisham tziva Hashem et habracha, because there on Hermon, apparently, God commanded Chaim ad haolam. God commanded eternal life on Mount Hermon. And the dew, metaphorically, the dew of Hermon is going to come down to Israel and revive Israel. You've heard this term, the dew of resurrection, right? The Midrash always describes, it's from Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu says you will come back to life. Kital orot talecha. There will be a dew of light that resurrects you at the end of days. The resurrection that comes after in the Messianic age. Where is that dew flowing from? King David says it's flowing from, metaphorically, from Har Hermon. That is the spiritual source of the dew of resurrection. And the Idra Zuta says, how did Rashbi pass away? He said the verse, Kisham tziva Hashem et habracha chaim ad haolam. There on Hermon, God commanded eternal life. Amar Rabbi Abba, and Rabbi Abba, who was his scribe, who was writing a lot of this down, who was there when Rashbi passed away, he said, Lo siyem butzina kadisha, the holy lamp, the holy fire, Rashbi, didn't say lemeimar chaim, as he said the word chaim, and before he finished saying the word chaim ad haolam, that's when he died. He passed away reciting this verse. That God from Al Hermon is going to bring about the dew of resurrection. That's actually how Rashbi passed away. So it's all connected. The mountain is also of great significance. It's not just militarily important, it's spiritually very important when we see that Israel has recaptured all of Al Hermon. So I'm going to conclude with something mystical. That's it. We're out of time. This, to me, is very powerful. I don't know if you'll find it powerful, but let's see. It's very Kabbalistic, okay? So if you understand the term, I don't want to dwell on the terms. I think most of you know these terms. Okay? You're all seasoned Kabbalists. Okay? If you put it all together, I think it's a beautiful insight and something to meditate on. Practically all of Kabbalah, at least the Arizal's Kabbalah, is built on the concept of tikkunim, of rectifications, right? Tikkun. We have to rectify the world. We have to rectify ourselves. And there's a few major ones that the Arizal always talks about. The first tikkun, and I've spoken about this many, many times, the first tikkun is the tikkun of rapach. That's the very first one. Remember, Bereshit starts by saying that God's Spirit, Veruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim, that God's Spirit hovered over the waters. And the Arizal says merachefet is met rapach. Right? It's the shattering of the vessels. It's that God made a perfect universe, but the universe shattered. It was too perfect. It collapsed. It broke. The sparks of holiness fell into klipa, into husks. And our job is to free those sparks and to rebuild the cosmos spiritually. And there were 288 major pieces. That's what Rapach is. Rapach is 288. Resh, Pe, Chet, Het. Rapach is 288. So that's the first tikkun. That's the ultimate tikkun. The ultimate tikkun is from the very beginning, from the second verse of Genesis, is the 288 pieces from the start of creation. And the Arizal says that every time you make a bracha on something before you eat it, you free the sparks that might be in there. Every time you pray, you free whatever sparks might be around you. You learn Torah. That's why the Arizal says we were exiled to all the corners of the world. Everything God does is for a reason. We had to go to all the corners of the world to free all those sparks that are trapped everywhere. That is our mystical purpose. Where Jews pray, where Jews learn Torah, where Jews make brachas on the water, on the food, on the air, whatever it is, on the clothes, everything. We make brachas on everything. We elevate the sparks, the holy sparks, and rectify the cosmos. That's the first number of tikkun. That's 288. That's the tikkun of Rapach. The next one is the tikkun of, it's lesser known. It's not mentioned as often in the Arizal, but you do see it a number of times. It's a tikkun of Kalach. Kalach is 138. Kuf Lamed Het, 138. That's the what does the root mean? Leit kalech. It's to shower. It's water. So that's the tikkun of flowing water. Okay. And the Arizal uses it in various contexts, like a person, God forbid, who killed somebody would be reincarnated in a certain way in flowing water to wash away it's like a midah keneged midah. For being a shofech damim, for spilling blood, he will be in constant spilling of water upon him. He will be in an eternal shower almost. It'll feel like an eternal shower, that he needs to be under rushing water, that this person will be reincarnated in a place of rushing waters, in a river, in a waterfall. The Arizal says this. It's a very deep mystical thing of being purified, being rectified through rushing waters. It's connected in general to mikvah water, of living, of flowing water, right, of spring water, of river water, purifying a person. There's a tikkun of kalach, of 138. Then you got another tikkun, which is, you see it all over the Arizal, which is the tikkun of sak. Sak literally means sackcloth. You know how you see this in Tanakh, and throughout history, people would mourn by wearing sackcloth and ashes, put ashes on your head, and sit in sackcloth and ashes. And the Arizal often prescribes, as a tikkun for certain sins, for a person to sit in sackcloth. And he says, like, even when you're fasting, it's good to fast with sackcloth. So he'll talk, and that's the tikkun of sak, because sin kuf is 400, and there's a whole mystical explanation of the 400. It's connected to Esav's 400 men and the 400 worlds that the Zohar speaks about. Again, beyond the scope of the discussion right now. But there's a tikkun of 400 of sackcloth. And the final one that brings it all back together is the tikkun of shach. Shach dinim. You've heard this before? Shach is 320. Shin, chaf. Shach dinim is 320. And the Arizal explains what this is. There's 320 paths of justice in the world. There's shach dinim, and the Arizal says that he brings it back, he ties it back to Genesis. The 320 comes from Merachefet, Met Rapach, 288, plus the 32 paths of wisdom. God is mentioned 32 times in Genesis. Elohim, the name of God, which is the name of justice, is Elohim. Right? Hashem is the name of Rachamim, of mercy, and Elohim is the name of justice, judgment. And in Genesis chapter 1, in Bereshit, Hashem is not mentioned. It's only 32 times Elohim. So when you add 32 to the 288 shattered pieces, that's 320. So again, it goes back to Ruach Elohim Erechefet al Pnei Hamayim, to the Spirit in Genesis, to the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. And if you remember that Spirit of God, the Midrash says, Ruach Elohim is actually the Spirit of Mashiach. So we said, Michayahu says in chapter 5 that God already formed the soul of Mashiach from the first days of creation. The Midrash says, Ruach Elohim Erechefet al Pnei Hamayim. Ruach Elohim is referring to Mashiach's soul. God put the cure before the disease. God already made the soul of Mashiach at the beginning of time for the end of days. So now what does this have to do with us awaiting Mashiach, awaiting the Messianic age, and we're right there, and we feel like Geulah is so close? What do these 4 tikkunim have to do with what we've seen in the past year? So look at the numbers and the progression. There's Rapach, there's Kalach, there's Sak, and there's Shach. Okay, there's 288, 138, 400, and 320. Earlier this year, all eyes were on Rafah, right? All eyes on Rafah. The whole world didn't want us to go in there. Israel insisted, we have to finish the job. We have to go there. There's hostages there. Israel did free hostages there. The whole world was trying to stop Israel from going to Rafah. And we went to Rafah, right? And Rafah is Reish Pei Chet, right? It's 288. Rafah is 288. It's the first tikkun. It's the first place that Israel had to go. Rafah fell first. And right after that, that was the end of it, basically. They took the Philadelphia corridor. Then the focus shifted from Gaza to Lebanon, to the north. They fought Lebanon. The war ended now at the Litani River, right? The ceasefire deal is Hezbollah cannot cross the Litani River. They have to stay north of the Litani. That river of water is the place where the war ends. That's Kalach. That's 138. That's flowing water. That's the tikkun of water. 138 is Gematria Lebanon. Right? Lamed Bet Nun Vav Nun. Lebanon is 138. Right? Rafah was 288. Lebanon, 138. That was next. Now Lebanon was over just a couple of weeks ago. Now all the focus, now all the attention shifted to Damascus. Right? Damascus is Damsak. Right? It's exactly the 400. The Sin Kuf is the 400. Now Damascus has fallen. That's the tikkun of Sak, right? Of the ashes. You can relate these to the four elements, right? You can probably already figure that out yourself, right? Sackcloth and ashes, water, the river, right? Rafah. And the last one is Shach. Guess what that is? Who's the Shach? The Shach of Iran, right? Shach has always been the leader. The name for the leader of Iran has always been the Shach, right? The Shach Pahlavi was deposed, but regardless, again, Shach is just like Ben-Hadad, like Pharaoh, just a title for whoever is the leader of Iran at any given time. So the final, the greatest, the Chamesh Gvurot, the 320 channels of Dinim, that's the Shach, that's in Iran, right? That's the final domino piece. So we had Rafah, we had Lebanon, right? We had Damascus, and now there's just one domino piece that needs to fall for all the tikkunim to be completed, right? Rafah, Kalach, Sak, and Shach, coming soon to a theater near you. So that's what people often ask me, what to look forward to. So I had all these emails in the last few days. What should we look forward to now? Okay, now 70 days pass. What's next, right? So what's next, based on this framework, again, it's just my idea. You like it, you don't, but I think that it makes sense. Based on the tikkunim that the Arizal set forth, the major ones, and just even by the names, it's so perfect. It just lines up so perfectly. So I think what we should look forward to, God willing, is the fall of the current Shach, which is the final piece of the puzzle, right? The head of the snake, of the monster. And remember the old prophecy that we've said it so many times. Shana shemelech HaMashiach ba. It says that what will happen, it's the Paras is the star of that show. All eyes are on Paras now. So Paras is supposed to be the one that instigates the final set of events that bring Mashiach in that final year. So that's the next step, and God willing, we'll see Mashiach very soon. So we'll end with that for now. Okay.